I'm a North Dakota farm boy. I grew up without electricity, without running water, no telephones, no TV, none of that. All born at home. So when people tell me, close the door, do you think you were born in the barn? I said, yeah, I was. So I came here down to Wichita in the fall of 1970. Then Sacred Heart College enlisted me to come down here, and I did the director of religious activities and did quite a few other things while I was here. Prior to that, my educational work was at the University of Dayton. I have an undergraduate degree in philosophy, master's degree in theology from the university. Then also did my doctoral work in medical ethics through a program in Indiana. And I was at Newman for 13 years and then got approached about starting up hospice, which was a new concept in the late 70s, early 80s. So I got more and more interested in the concept of providing end-of-life care, and then left Newman in '83, and basically I've been doing hospice work since then. My involvement also as a Catholic priest is to be chaplain for the sisters out by Newman University, the Precious Blood Sisters. I'm kind of reflecting on my educational background, and as I was going through a lot of philosophy and theology, we call it moral theology then, along with other branches, I was thinking, well, how is this ever going to be useful? But I can assure you it has been extremely useful in my work as a medical ethicist. Teaching me critical thinking, analytical thinking has been very helpful with medical ethics. So that's an overview of where I've been in terms of my professional life journey. When you're looking at the history of medicine, for example, if you put yourself back to 1900, what was there that you had to sort out in terms of doing or not doing? So if I was in a life-threatening situation or a loved one of mine was in that same situation, what did you have to decide on? Basically, it was always do anything and everything possible. But what was possible in 1900? Extremely limited. There was really very little you had to sort out. But as medicine developed over the years, we've got an endless array now. For example, they didn't even know how do you determine what's going on with Tom when he's not feeling well. Well, if the big beast did a number on me, the bears and the lions, it was pretty obvious that that was going to be the cause of his death. But what if I was simply diseased? And it was 2 words initially. Not feeling well, ill at ease. What made Tom be diseased? Well, one of the theories was possessed by evil spirits. So we've got a lot of that in the Christian writings, where evil spirits were seen as the cause of a lot of woe. And exorcism was used. But even if the exorcist route didn't work, then they would go to the physician route. Those would wear 2 hats, the faith leader and also the practitioner in terms of medicine. And things they tried often, Sandy, were counterproductive. For example, if I had a splitting headache, what did they posit? Well, all those evil spirits had to be in Tom's head. So if exorcism didn't work, then you do a medical procedure. How do you let the evil spirits go? Drill a hole in Tom's head. So not to put you on the spot, but what's that fancy Greek word? You get an A+ if you get it. They would call it trephination. Drill the hole, let them out. Do you think that helped me? Not in the least. What about if it weren't localized? I was diseased all over. They posited then that all of those evil spirits got to every nook and cranny of Tom's body through the blood vessels. So now how do you get rid of them? Bloodletting. Bloodletting. Where again, you have to ask yourself, did that help me? No, I think it made it worse. And I often like to ask people, well, who did that procedure? The surgeon? It was the barber. Even to this day, the sign of a barber is the pole with a bloodline through it. But again, it didn't help that we did come along in medicine with ways that now would be able to address injury and disease both. And the big breakthrough was really penicillin, the antibiotic, the anti-little beastly life. Once they decided under the microscope that it wasn't evil spirits or inanimate, that it was actually physical microorganisms, they had a word for it, animalcula, which really translates that Latin as miniature animals, little beasties, little monsters. And so now you knew the enemy, and so you had to come up with something to defeat that enemy, which was antibiotic, penicillin, that got to be used first in World War II, 1942, and then later in the general public. But penicillin is just the tip of the iceberg. Now we've got an endless array. Can you still simply say, because we can, therefore we must, that we have a moral obligation? Now you've got to get a more disciplined way of sorting it out. When is enough enough? When is enough enough? And that's really the advent of this discipline, this field of medical ethics that we now use today. So that in a nutshell is what got us to this point of needing to have a much more disciplined way of sorting these things out. My earlier comment was, I feel that having lots and lots of philosophy and history of philosophy and theology really has prepared me to engage in this, what I call critical thinking, to sort it out. This has been around a long, long time in terms of, so often today we simply think medicine is all about cure. Well, we didn't have cure in 1900. But the saying that's been around for a long, long time, the role of medicine is to cure sometimes, to relieve often, but to comfort always. To comfort always. That's never going to be exhausted. Sooner or later, no matter how sophisticated and how endless the array of medical intervention seems to be, eventually we're all going to get to that point of being incurable. I often like to ask groups where I'm doing workshops or seminars, what's the mortality rate for every generation? Well, I get all kinds of answers. I had one medical resident at Wesley say, oh, I think it's about 60%. Everybody started chuckling, you know. I do believe that it's 100%. That sooner or later, we're all going to become incurable. So even in 1900, the curing sometimes was really rare. But relieving and comfort is always part of the rich tradition of medicine. The unfortunate thing with all the developments that have gone on with regard to interventions for curative purposes is that we have lost sight of that comfort always. Where I think in the medical community today, and I don't want to overstate this, but I've seen it over and over again with medical professionals who feel that, and I want them to strive mightily, if I've got a life-threatening situation or one of my loved ones does, I want them to try to do whatever to keep death at bay. But sooner or later, death is not the enemy. Death becomes the friend, the healer. And we dare not always see death as a failure. It's only not providing good care, relieving and comforting while life is still going on that, in my estimation, is the failure. That's what we really need to guard against. And if you have done now, if you're the medical professional taking care of me, you've done the maximum to enhance my living to the very last breath, the very last second, you haven't failed, you've succeeded. And this whole question then of the curative, I like to see in terms of our role as patients accessing medical care. Most of the time in our life journey, we're going to access medical care for curative purposes. We'll be in what I call the sick role, where we're going to try to fix things. But once again, we're going to become incurable. When we get to that point, I still have a lot of life and living to do yet when I enter what I call the dying role, where there's not a realistic chance of turning around whatever is threatening my situation. So what we need to do then is to look in the dying role at providing the maximum support for that part of life's journey to be lived fully. So I can take care of unfinished business, take care of things that need to be addressed, whatever they may be. We'll talk about, I think, a little bit later. But let me give you a ahead of time illustration of that point. I walked into a patient's room, and I've been working now for the last, well, since '83. What's my math? Not that good. Now 37 years in hospice care. And I've learned a lot from the patients and families. We've had thousands, literally thousands. I think we're approaching 100,000 we've cared for. But anyway, as I walked into this patient's room, the first thing she said was, "Thank God for cancer." And I thought, well, that's kind of strange. You know, I didn't want to say anything about that. So I was trying to think in my mind, why would she say something like that? But I've also learned, keep your mouth shut for a while, Tom. Let people tell you what's going on rather than you assuming. So anyway, as she explored further with me, it became very obvious that she had a lot of things to address yet in terms of completing her life's journey. And above all, addressed in terms of connections with her loved ones. A lot of conflict, a lot of things that need to be taken care of. So if you're looking at it when she said, thank God for cancer, as we're going along even keel, death can occur very suddenly, unexpectedly. An accident, boom, we're gone. heart attack, we're gone. Versus with the cancer treatment, and she gets the diagnosis now, her prognosis is very limited, it's going to be a slope. So she said, thank God for that time. The time in which I can get together and try to patch things up. So with myself and the social worker, we worked very closely with her to do that. And it got to the point where the last person came in and reconciled. You know what happened in short order? She died, pretty much to the day. This is what I'm saying in terms of, let's move from the curative to the healing, from the sick role to the dying role, moving off of that in terms of now addressing what really defines us much more deeply than just our body. We are defined much more deeply with what I call the psychosocial spiritual aspect. That's where I think we really need to zero in on. Cure sometimes, relieve often, but comfort always. I should have mentioned earlier, English is not my first language. People are trying to figure out, what's his accent? My first language is German, so I kind of kid around with people and say, I'm still learning English words. And so I ask groups, well, what's the difference between cure and heal? And they are really nonplussed because we use them synonymously. If you're looking at those 4 areas I talked about, cure really zeroes into the physical functioning. We want to make sure we can fix what's ailing us, what's life-threatening. Versus heal comes from the Anglo-Saxon hal, which translates both into whole and holy. Healing really involves much, much more of who we are as human beings. So we'll exhaust the curative dimension. The bodies will break down. It's 100% in terms of the mortality rate, but we'll never exhaust the possibility of healing. Matter of fact, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who did a lot of work in terms of pioneering our approach to viewing death, she looks at death as the final stage of growth. It's the final stage of growth. When our bodies don't serve who we are anymore, call it even personhood, what do we need to do in our bodies? Let them go. So we can now live more fully with a body that's no longer serving us. That's how I differentiate cure and heal. Moving from the sick to the dying role is a very, very difficult process today. If you're looking at, again, medicine in 1900, you kind of ask yourself the question, was the movement from the sick to the dying role easy or difficult in 1900? Yet if to say more likely, it was easy in terms of simply viewing it from the medical perspective, because you had nothing you could do anyway. So you just assumed that you had this situation, death was going to follow pretty shortly. How about in 2020? Seems like there's always something more we can do in terms of the sick role, the curative role. So moving from that sick role to the dying role in 2020 is extremely difficult. It takes a lot of wrestling to get from that point to the other point. Absolutely.